The unmarked police cars rolled silently into the cul-de-sac at 5:43 a.m., their headlights cutting through the morning fog that blanketed Maple Street. Officers in tactical gear positioned themselves around the modest two-story home, the same home that had hosted neighborhood barbecues for nearly 25 years. Inside, Thomas Whitaker slept, unaware that the life he'd carefully constructed was about to collapse. "Police! Search warrant!" The front door splintered under the battering ram's force. In seconds, the 61-year-old hardware store owner was face down on his bedroom floor, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into his wrists. Neighbors in bathrobes gathered on their lawns, watching in stunned silence as the man who had coached Little League and organized the town's annual Christmas parade was led away in handcuffs. "I don't understand," one woman whispered, clutching her coffee mug. "That's Tom. He fixed my son's bike last summer." But in the quiet heart of Shelby County, Indiana, where cornfields stretch toward the horizon and everyone claims to know their neighbors, a terrible secret had been hiding for 23 years, right behind the friendly smile of the man who always waved from his porch. The 1997 disappearance of a 10-year-old girl had long been an open wound in this community, a case that haunted parents' dreams and changed how children were allowed to play outside. A mystery that most had reluctantly accepted would never be solved. Until now. As dawn broke over the sleepy town of Shelbyville that morning, residents would soon learn that the monster they'd feared for decades hadn't been some shadowy outsider passing through. He had been living among them all along, selling them tools, attending their church, and keeping his deadly secret buried deeper than anyone could have imagined. Before I continue with this shocking true crime story that will challenge everything you think you know about small-town safety, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Trust me, what happened next in this investigation will make you question everyone in your own neighborhood. September in Shelby County, Indiana brings a particular kind of beauty. The cornfields turn golden, ready for harvest. The air carries that first hint of autumn crispness, and the maple trees that line Main Street begin their slow transformation into brilliant shades of orange and red. In 1997, Shelbyville, the county seat with just over 15,000 residents, was the kind of place where most people left their doors unlocked and kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. Amelia Amy Wilson was exactly where she belonged in this Norman Rockwell painting of Middle America. A bright-eyed fourth grader at Lincoln Elementary, with honey blonde hair typically pulled back in a ponytail, Amy was known for her infectious laugh and collection of friendship bracelets that climbed halfway up her arm. Her teachers described her as curious and kind, the type of student who would share her lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. She loved horses, collected rocks, and had recently joined the school's science club. She was sunshine in human form, her mother would later tell reporters, her voice breaking. The kind of child who made friends with everyone she met. Friday, September 19, 1997, began like any other day. Amy ate breakfast, Cheerios with sliced bananas, her favorite, before heading to school. Security camera footage from Lincoln Elementary would later show her walking the hallways between classes, stopping to chat with friends, completely unaware that this ordinary day would be her last. After school, Amy went to her best friend Jessica Miller's house, just 3 blocks from her own home. The girls worked on a science project about the solar system, had pizza for dinner, and watched part of a Disney movie before Amy announced she needed to head home before dark. It was 7:15 p.m. when she hopped on her purple Huffy bicycle with white streamers flowing from the handlebars. "See you tomorrow," she called to Jessica, pedaling away into the golden hour of a perfect late summer evening. She never arrived home. By 8:30 p.m., Amy's parents had called the Millers, checked with other neighbors, and begun driving the short route between the houses. By 9:15 p.m., they had contacted the Shelbyville Police Department. By midnight, volunteer search parties were combing the neighborhoods with flashlights, calling Amy's name into the darkness. Officer Daniel Reeves was the first to find it, the purple bicycle lying on its side near the drainage ditch at the corner of Elm and Sycamore, just 6 houses away from Amy's home. The front wheel was still spinning slowly when he arrived, suggesting it had been abandoned only moments before. Amy's backpack remained strapped to the rear rack, containing her science notebook and a half-eaten pack of bubble gum. There were no signs of a struggle, no screams reported by neighbors, no suspicious vehicles noted in the area. She had simply vanished. By dawn, the FBI had arrived. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off 4 blocks. Agents in suits interviewed neighbors, while local officers organized search parties that would eventually include over 400 volunteers. Dogs tracked Amy's scent to the edge of the drainage ditch before losing it completely, suggesting she might have been placed in a vehicle. The community mobilized with remarkable speed. Local businesses donated food and supplies to the search teams. The Shelbyville Herald printed 10,000 flyers with Amy's photo. Churches held prayer vigils. School was cancelled for 3 days as the search expanded to include nearby woods, abandoned buildings, and even the murky waters of the Blue River. In all my years of law enforcement, I've never seen a community come together like this, Sheriff Robert Tanner told reporters on day 4 of the search. Every person in this county is looking for this little girl. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The FBI's mobile command center eventually packed up and left. The national news crews moved on to other stories. The search parties grew smaller. Amy's desk at Lincoln Elementary remained empty, adorned with cards and small gifts from classmates who couldn't understand why their friend wasn't coming back. For the Wilson family, time seemed to stop. Amy's mother took a leave of absence from her nursing job. Her father, a construction foreman, worked mechanically during the day and spent nights driving the county roads, searching. Her younger brother stopped speaking for nearly 6 months. "The not knowing is the worst part," Mr. Wilson told a local reporter on the 1-year anniversary of the disappearance. "You can't grieve, you can't move on, you just exist in this terrible limbo." As the investigation stalled, Shelby County changed. Parents no longer allowed children to ride bikes alone. Doors were locked. Strangers were viewed with suspicion. A collective innocence had been lost, replaced by a persistent, low-grade fear that settled over the community like a fog. And through it all, Thomas Whitaker continued to run his hardware store on Main Street, offering discounts to search volunteers and even donating flashlights to the effort. He attended the candlelight vigils. He put Amy's flyer in his shop window. He shook his head sadly when customers mentioned the tragedy. "It's just awful," he would say. "Simply awful what happened to that poor little girl." I'm curious, where are you watching this video from today? Drop your location in the comments below. It's amazing how these small-town mysteries resonate with people all across the country. The first 48 hours of any missing person investigation are critical. For Amy Wilson, those hours produced a flurry of activity, but frustratingly few leads. The Shelbyville Police Department, assisted by FBI agents from the Indianapolis field office, conducted over 200 interviews in the first week alone. They collected tire impressions from the dirt road near where the bicycle was found. They took fingerprints from the handlebars. They even drained a section of the nearby drainage ditch, finding nothing but mud and discarded soda cans. "We're pursuing every possible angle," Police Chief Michael Donovan told reporters at a press conference 1 week after the disappearance. The bags under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. No stone will be left unturned. The initial investigation focused on several promising leads. A blue sedan had been spotted, driving slowly through the neighborhood earlier that afternoon. A registered sex offender lived in a neighboring county. A maintenance worker at Lincoln Elementary had called in sick the day after Amy disappeared. Each lead was meticulously followed, only to end in disappointment. The blue sedan belonged to an elderly woman visiting her grandson. The sex offender was confirmed to have been in Cincinnati on a construction job. The maintenance worker had legitimate food poisoning, verified by hospital records. One by one, potential suspects were cleared. By month 3, the daily briefings had become weekly. By month 6, they stopped altogether. For the Wilson family, life became an endless nightmare. Mrs. Wilson would wake up each morning, momentarily forgetting, then being crushed anew by reality. Mr. Wilson threw himself into the search, taking unpaid leave from his job to follow up on tips the police had deemed too insubstantial to pursue. Their marriage strained under the weight of their grief. "We stopped talking about anything else," Mrs. Wilson would later recall. Every conversation, every thought, every moment was about finding Amy. We became strangers living in the same house of pain. Their younger son, Jason, just 7 when his sister vanished, grew up in the shadow of absence. His childhood became defined by what wasn't there: an empty chair at the dinner table, a bedroom across the hall that remained exactly as it had been in September 1997, parents whose attention was perpetually elsewhere. I felt guilty for wanting them to see me, Jason would say years later. How could I ask for attention when my sister was still missing? The investigation faced significant technological limitations that would be hard to imagine today. In 1997, DNA testing was expensive and time-consuming. The National DNA Database was in its infancy. Cell phones were uncommon, especially among children, meaning no digital footprint to follow. Security cameras were rare in residential areas. Social media didn't exist to spread information quickly. Detective Marcus Reynolds, who would later become lead investigator when the case was reopened, reflected on these challenges. We were essentially working with flashlights when today's investigators have floodlights. The tools we have now, rapid DNA testing, digital forensics, genealogy databases, they would have changed everything. The FBI provided what resources they could, but without a body, without witnesses, without physical evidence beyond the abandoned bicycle, the case gradually slipped into the dreaded category of cold. As months turned into years, public attention inevitably waned. The annual candlelight vigil, which had drawn hundreds on the first anniversary, attracted fewer than 30 people by the 5th. Amy's age-progressed photos, showing what she might look like as she grew older, appeared less frequently on bulletin boards and milk cartons. New tragedies demanded the community's emotional energy. Only Thomas Whitaker, the hardware store owner, seemed never to forget. Each year on the anniversary, he would close his shop early and personally deliver flowers to the Wilson home. He established a small scholarship in Amy's name at Lincoln Elementary for students interested in science, her favorite subject. He kept her flyer posted by his cash register long after others had taken theirs down. Tom was our rock, Mrs. Wilson would tell a reporter on the 10th anniversary. When others moved on, he remembered. He understood that for us time stopped that September day. The Wilsons refused to leave Shelbyville, despite the painful memories. She might come home, Mrs. Wilson would explain simply, when friends suggested a fresh start elsewhere. They kept Amy's room untouched, her rock collection gathering dust on the windowsill, her favorite stuffed horse still positioned on her pillow, waiting. They marked birthdays she wasn't there to celebrate. Elementary school graduation. What would have been her first day of high school? Her 16th birthday. Each milestone a fresh wound. By 2007, a decade after the disappearance, the case file had been relegated to the archives of the Shelbyville Police Department. Occasional tips still came in. A girl resembling Amy spotted at a mall in Kentucky. A deathbed confession from an Indiana prisoner that proved false. A psychic claiming to have visions of a red barn. But none led anywhere substantial. The investigation wasn't just cold. It was frozen solid. Detective Reynolds, then a junior officer, would occasionally pull the file during quiet night shifts. Something about it wouldn't let me go, he would later explain. The randomness of it, the completeness of the disappearance, the fact that in a town where everyone knows everyone, nobody saw anything. He began keeping a separate notebook of observations, questions, and theories. He requested old evidence be preserved rather than destroyed, as department policy allowed after 10 years. He visited the site where the bicycle was found on his days off, trying to see something his predecessors had missed. Most of the department thought I was obsessed, Reynolds admitted. Maybe I was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was right in front of us. He had no idea how right he was, or how many more years would pass before technology would finally catch up to the truth. If you're finding this case as compelling as I do, please hit that like button and make sure you've got notifications turned on. The breakthrough in this investigation is something nobody in Shelbyville could have predicted, and you won't want to miss what happens next. March 17, 2020 dawned cold and drizzly in Shelby County, the kind of late winter day that makes spring feel impossibly distant. At the far edge of Willow Creek Nature Preserve, nearly 7 miles from where Amy Wilson's bicycle had been found 23 years earlier, a conservation biologist was conducting a routine survey of the wetland ecosystem. Dr. Meredith Lawson had been tracking the migration patterns of native bird species when her boots sank into unusually soft soil near a stand of old-growth sycamores. What she initially mistook for an animal burrow revealed something far more sinister as the rain washed away layers of accumulated soil, a small human bone protruding from the earth. "I knew immediately it wasn't animal," Dr. Lawson would later testify. "I'd done enough fieldwork to recognize a human radius when I saw one, and from the size, I knew it belonged to a child." The Shelby County Sheriff's Department secured the area within 30 minutes. By nightfall, the FBI Evidence Response Team had established a grid system around the discovery site. Over the next 4 days, working meticulously through rain and occasional snow flurries, they recovered approximately 85% of a human skeleton. The remains were transported to the State Forensic Anthropology Lab in Indianapolis, where preliminary analysis confirmed what many had already suspected. They belonged to a female child, approximately 10 years old, who had been deceased for an extended period. Dental records would soon confirm what Shelbyville had feared for 23 years. Amy Wilson had been found. For the Wilson family, the discovery brought a complex tangle of emotions. The confirmation shattered any lingering hope that Amy might somehow still be alive, yet it also delivered a certain terrible relief. "We can finally bring her home," Mr. Wilson told reporters, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "We can finally give her a proper resting place." The discovery of Amy's remains coincided with a revolution in forensic science. In the years since her disappearance, DNA technology had advanced exponentially. What once required a blood sample the size of a quarter could now be accomplished with a few skin cells. What once took months could now be completed in days. But the most significant advancement came in the form of forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that had gained prominence after the 2018 arrest of the Golden State Killer. This approach combines traditional DNA analysis with genealogical research, allowing investigators to identify suspects through their biological relatives. Detective Marcus Reynolds, now the head of Shelbyville's Major Crimes Unit, assembled a specialized cold case team. He brought in Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a forensic genetic genealogist from the University of Michigan, and partnered with the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children unit. "We're not just reopening this case," Reynolds announced at a press conference that drew national attention. "We're approaching it with tools and techniques that didn't exist when Amy disappeared. This isn't the same investigation it was in 1997. The team's first breakthrough came from the remains themselves. Despite decades of exposure to the elements, DNA was successfully extracted from Amy's femur. This provided a complete genetic profile of the victim, crucial for eliminating contamination in any other evidence. More significantly, soil samples taken from beneath the remains contained degraded but still viable DNA that did not match Amy's profile. Using advanced extraction techniques, the lab was able to isolate partial DNA sequences from what appeared to be bodily fluids that had leached into the soil. In 1997, this level of degraded DNA would have been useless to us, Dr. Montgomery explained. Today, we can not only detect it, but amplify specific markers enough to create a usable profile. The team also revisited the original evidence. Amy's bicycle, preserved in the evidence locker for over 2 decades, was re-examined using techniques that could detect touch DNA. Genetic material left behind from skin cells when someone handles an object. The handlebars, previously tested only for fingerprints, now yielded partial DNA profiles from multiple individuals. Most were easily eliminated: Amy herself, her parents, the police officers who had handled the bike. But one partial profile remained unidentified. It wasn't complete enough for a standard database search, but it provided valuable markers for genetic genealogy analysis. The soil DNA and the touch DNA from the bicycle handlebars showed significant overlapping markers, suggesting they came from the same individual. Dr. Montgomery uploaded these genetic markers to GED Match, a public database where people voluntarily share their DNA results from consumer testing companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. The system identified several distant matches, people who shared enough genetic markers to be third or fourth cousins of the unknown subject. It's like starting with the outer branches of a family tree and working your way inward, Dr. Montgomery would later explain. Each match gives you a piece of the puzzle until you can narrow down to specific branches of a family. For 3 months, the team constructed elaborate family trees, tracing the lineages of each genetic match back several generations, then forward again to identify all possible candidates. They narrowed the pool from thousands of distant relatives to dozens of closer ones, then to a handful of individuals who fit the geographic and demographic profile. Each potential candidate was discreetly investigated. Some were eliminated through public records, showing they lived elsewhere in 1997. Others voluntarily provided DNA samples when approached by investigators with a cover story about a regional genetic study. On June 4, 2020, the team gathered in the Shelbyville Police Department conference room. The whiteboard was covered with names, dates, and connecting lines, a genetic roadmap leading to potential suspects. Dr. Montgomery pointed to one name circled in red. Based on the genealogical analysis, this individual shares enough markers with our unknown sample to be a potential match. The probability is high enough to justify a direct comparison. Detective Reynolds stared at the name in disbelief. Thomas Whitaker, age 61, owner of Whitaker's Hardware. Lifelong Shelbyville resident. The man who had established a scholarship in Amy's name. The man who brought flowers to the Wilson home every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. The man who had been hiding in plain sight for 23 years. That's impossible, Reynolds whispered. He was one of the biggest supporters of the search. His voice trailed off as the horrible possibility took root. The next day, officers retrieved a coffee cup Whitaker had discarded at a local cafe. The DNA extracted from it matched both the soil sample and the touch DNA from the bicycle handlebars. The match probability was 1 in 750 million. After 23 years, they had their answer. What time is it where you're watching this video? Drop it in the comments below. I'm curious to know if people are staying up late for this true crime story or watching during their lunch break. This next part about how they finally caught Thomas Whitaker is absolutely mind-blowing. To understand how a killer could remain undetected for over 2 decades in a close-knit community, one must first understand the perfect disguise, ordinariness. The ability to blend in, to become such a fixture in daily life that you become practically invisible, not through absence, but through such consistent presence that people stop truly seeing you. In Shelbyville, no one had mastered this art better than the man who would eventually be revealed as Amy Wilson's killer. Born and raised in Shelby County, this individual represented the backbone of small-town America. A graduate of Shelbyville High School, class of 1977, he'd been described in his yearbook as dependable and always willing to lend a hand, early indicators of the persona he would cultivate throughout his adult life. After a brief stint at Indiana State University, he returned home to take over his family's business, becoming one of Main Street's most reliable merchants. His store served as more than just a commercial establishment. It was a community hub where farmers discussed crop prices, where Little League coaches picked up equipment, where generations of local families came for everything from their first toolbox to the materials for their retirement projects. The bell above his door had announced the arrival of nearly every resident at some point over the years. He knew everyone's name, their kids' names, what projects they were working on, recalled Janet Simmons, a longtime customer. He'd remember if your daughter had a dance recital or if your roof needed fixing. That kind of personal touch meant something in a town like ours. His community involvement extended far beyond business hours. He served 2 terms on the town council in the early 1990s. He volunteered with the Rotary Club's annual food drive. He helped organize the county fair's hardware demonstration booth. During Christmas, he dressed as Santa at the community center, bouncing local children on his knee and asking what they wanted from the North Pole. The thought makes investigators shudder now. His personal life appeared equally ordinary. A marriage in his late 20s that ended amicably after 5 years. No children of his own, though he was known as a favorite uncle to his nieces and nephews. A modest home on Maple Street with a well-maintained lawn and bird feeders that he diligently filled each morning. A golden retriever named Buck who accompanied him to the store most days, delighting customers. If you were casting a movie about small-town America and needed someone to play trusted local businessman, he'd be who you'd pick, Detective Reynolds observed. There was nothing about him that triggered alarm bells, nothing that made you look twice. This carefully constructed normalcy served as the perfect cover for something much darker lurking beneath the surface. Psychological profilers who later examined the case would identify classic signs of a highly organized patient predator, someone who could compartmentalize his criminal behavior so completely that even he might have believed in his public persona most of the time. The most dangerous predators aren't the ones who look dangerous, explained Dr. Vanessa Torres, a forensic psychologist consulted by the FBI. They're the ones who understand exactly how to appear trustworthy. They study normal human behavior and mimic it precisely because they know that's their best camouflage. His involvement in the aftermath of Amy's disappearance represented perhaps his most audacious deception. While most predators distance themselves from their crimes, he did the opposite, inserting himself directly into the investigation and subsequent memorials. This counterintuitive approach served him well. He volunteered for search parties, strategically joining groups assigned to areas miles from where he had hidden Amy's remains. He attended police briefings open to the public, gathering information about the direction of the investigation. He offered his store as a meeting point for volunteers, gaining first-hand knowledge of search plans. It's a phenomenon we call hiding in the spotlight, Dr. Torres noted. By being visibly invested in finding the victim, he created a psychological barrier against suspicion. Who would suspect the man who seems most dedicated to solving the crime? His apparent compassion for the Wilson family further cemented his standing above reproach. The annual flower deliveries, the scholarship fund, the supportive shoulder he offered at vigils. These weren't just acts of community kindness, they were calculated moves in a long-term strategy to remain beyond suspicion. Former Police Chief Donovan, now retired, reflected on this painful irony. He was literally the last person we would have suspected. When resources were tight and we needed to narrow our focus, he was someone we actively eliminated from consideration because his support seemed so genuine. The suspect maintained this elaborate facade for years, even as the case grew colder. When interest in Amy's disappearance naturally waned, he became its most devoted champion, keeping her memory alive through the very community connections that protected him from scrutiny. What investigators would later discover, through careful examination of his life, were the nearly imperceptible cracks in his perfect disguise. The solo camping trips he took several times a year to disconnect from technology. The basement workshop where he spent hours alone, door locked, working on special projects. The peculiar habit of meticulously documenting his whereabouts through receipts, photographs, and witness interactions, creating what prosecutors would later call a manufactured alibi lifestyle. Most telling was his computer, seized during the eventual search of his home. Forensic analysis revealed that he had searched news articles about Amy's case hundreds of times over the years. He had created elaborate digital folders tracking the investigation's progress. He had researched cold cases that remained unsolved and studied advances in forensic technology. He was monitoring the investigation's pulse, Detective Reynolds explained, assessing his risk level as technology evolved. Most criminals try to forget their crimes. He was obsessively tracking his. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that he had maintained a hidden collection of newspaper clippings about Amy's disappearance, stored in a waterproof container beneath his garden shed. The articles were organized chronologically, some with handwritten notes in the margins, observations about investigative missteps or theories that had led police in wrong directions. As the forensic genealogy narrowed toward him in 2020, he remained completely unaware. The investigators had been careful to keep their re-examination of the case quiet, announcing only that they were reviewing cold cases with new technology, without specifying which ones. The man who had hidden so successfully in plain sight for 23 years, continued his daily routine, opening his store at 8 a.m., chatting with customers about the weather, attending his Rotary meetings, walking his aging dog through the neighborhood at dusk. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to implode. I'm taking a different approach with this question. I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts. What do you think makes someone able to live a double life for so many years? Could you tell if someone in your community was hiding something this dark? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The arrest of Thomas Whitaker was executed with military precision. After obtaining search and arrest warrants based on the DNA evidence, the Shelbyville Police Department coordinated with FBI tactical specialists to develop an approach that minimized risk. They knew that cornered predators could be unpredictable, and despite Whitaker's age, they took no chances. The pre-dawn raid described at the beginning of our story unfolded exactly as planned. Whitaker was taken into custody without incident, appearing more resigned than surprised when officers burst through his door. His only words during the arrest, "I wondered when you'd finally figure it out." The search of his home, conducted over the next 72 hours, revealed the hidden world beneath the friendly hardware store owner's facade. In a concealed space behind his basement workbench, investigators discovered a locked fireproof box containing a small purple hair clip, a friendship bracelet, and a child's diary with Amy written on the cover, trophies kept for over 2 decades. Forensic teams found traces of DNA matching Amy's profile in the trunk of Whitaker's vintage Buick, which he had maintained in mint condition since the 1990s, despite rarely driving it. Computer forensics uncovered thousands of images of young girls, many photographed around Shelbyville, at school events, in parks, walking home, suggesting Amy may not have been his only target, just the only one he acted upon. News of Whitaker's arrest spread through Shelbyville like wildfire. Main Street filled with stunned residents gathering in small groups, trying to process the unthinkable. The man who had sold them hammers and nails, who had fixed their screen doors, who had donated to their fundraisers, was a monster wearing a neighborly mask. "I let him hold my daughter when she was a baby," one woman told local reporters, her voice shaking with horror. "He came to my son's graduation party. How could we not have known?" For many residents, the revelation triggered a painful re-examination of every interaction they'd ever had with Whitaker, the friendly advice he'd offered, the times he'd volunteered to deliver purchases to their homes, the way he sometimes watched children playing in the town square from his store window. "The whole town is going through a collective trauma," observed Pastor Robert Jenkins of First Methodist Church, which quickly organized community support sessions. "It's not just about Amy anymore. It's about 23 years of trusting someone who betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible." Perhaps no one felt this betrayal more acutely than the Wilson family. For them, the arrest brought a tsunami of conflicting emotions: relief that their daughter's killer had been caught, rage at the years of deception, and a sickening realization that they had accepted comfort from the very man responsible for their pain. "He brought us flowers," Mrs. Wilson said, during a brief statement to the press, her voice hollow with disbelief. "He stood in our living room, year after year, looking at Amy's photos on our wall, knowing exactly what he'd done to her." Mr. Wilson, who had shaken Whitaker's hand countless times over the years, found himself unable to speak publicly, overcome by what his attorney described as a fury too profound for words. The preliminary hearing drew national media attention. The courthouse square, normally quiet enough to hear birds singing in the oak trees, became a forest of satellite trucks and camera equipment. Journalists from across the country descended on Shelbyville, many focusing their coverage on the shocking betrayal of a community's trust, rather than just the crime itself. Inside the courtroom, prosecutor Stephanie Lawson laid out the state's case with methodical precision. The DNA evidence formed the cornerstone, the match between samples found at the burial site and on the bicycle to Whitaker's genetic profile was, in the prosecutor's words, as close to scientific certainty as human knowledge allows. But the physical evidence told only part of the story. Cell phone tower records from Whitaker's early model cellular phone, preserved in old carrier databases, placed him near the area where Amy disappeared at the critical time. Bank records showed he had purchased an unusual amount of cleaning supplies and bleach the day after the abduction. a former employee, testified that Whitaker had closed the store unexpectedly that September afternoon, something he had never done before or since. Most damning was the testimony of Amy's best friend Jessica, now an adult with children of her own. She recalled that Whitaker had been making deliveries in their neighborhood the day Amy disappeared and had stopped to chat with them while they worked on their science project. He had asked Amy specifically what time she would be heading home. "He said the roads get dark early in September," Jessica testified, her voice barely audible. "He said he'd keep an eye out for her on her way home. I thought he was being nice." Whitaker's defense team, faced with overwhelming evidence, focused primarily on his mental state, suggesting early-onset dementia might have affected his memory and judgment. This strategy collapsed when prosecutors produced Whitaker's meticulously organized financial records and business inventory from the weeks immediately before and after his arrest, demonstrating a mind still sharp enough to track thousands of individual hardware items and their costs to the penny. When offered a chance to plead guilty in exchange for revealing the full details of the crime, Whitaker refused. His only statement to the court was brief and chilling in its banality. "I've lived two lives for a very long time. I'm tired of pretending." The trial lasted just 11 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The judge sentenced Whitaker to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, noting that if Indiana still had the death penalty, this case would have warranted it. As Whitaker was led from the courtroom in shackles, Mrs. Wilson stood up and spoke the first words she had ever directly addressed to her daughter's killer. "Amy was real. She mattered. Remember that in your cell every day for the rest of your life." How's the weather where you are today? Drop a comment below while you process this shocking turn in our true crime story. Sometimes talking about something simple like the weather helps ground us when we're hearing about something so disturbing. The conviction of Thomas Whitaker reverberated far beyond the boundaries of Shelby County. Cold case investigators across the country took notice of how advances in forensic genealogy had finally brought justice in a case that traditional methods had failed to solve for over 2 decades. The Wilson case represents a paradigm shift in how we approach cold cases, explained FBI Special Agent Kimberly Russo at a national law enforcement conference 6 months after the conviction. "We're now going back through thousands of unsolved cases with similar profiles, applying these new techniques. Cases that investigators once considered hopeless now have real potential for resolution." In the year following Whitaker's conviction, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported a 34% increase in cold case reviews utilizing forensic genealogy. At least 17 long-dormant investigations in 12 different states were reopened, specifically citing the Wilson case as inspiration. 7 of those have since resulted in identifications or arrests. For the community of Shelbyville, the aftermath has been a complex journey of healing and reflection. The hardware store that once served as Whitaker's cover now houses a community center focused on child safety education. The scholarship fund he established in Amy's name has been renamed and expanded, now supporting students interested in forensic science and criminal justice. "We're determined that something good will come from this tragedy," explained Lincoln Elementary Principal Diane Hoffman. "The next generation of Shelbyville children will grow up understanding both the importance of personal safety and the power of scientific advancement in pursuing justice." The Wilson family established the Amelia Grace Foundation, which provides funding for small police departments to access advanced DNA testing for cold cases involving children. Their advocacy helped pass Amy's Law in Indiana, which eliminated the statute of limitations for child homicides and mandated the preservation of DNA evidence in such cases indefinitely. "Nothing brings Amy back," Mr. Wilson said at the foundation's launch, "but knowing that other families might find answers because of what happened to our daughter gives her life continuing meaning." Perhaps the most profound change has occurred in how Shelbyville residents view their community and each other. The betrayal by someone they had trusted implicitly forced a painful reassessment of small-town assumptions about safety and familiarity. "We used to say, 'Everyone knows everyone,' like it was a protective shield," reflected Pastor Jenkins. Now we understand that knowing someone's face or name doesn't mean you truly know them. There's a healthier vigilance now, balanced with a determination not to let fear define us. The case also highlighted how predators often hide behind community involvement and apparent concern for victims, a pattern that has led to new training for law enforcement about investigation inserters, who volunteer extensively in searches for victims they themselves harmed. For Detective Marcus Reynolds, now frequently consulted by other departments on cold case methodology, the resolution brought professional validation but little personal satisfaction. "I don't believe in perfect justice," he noted in a rare interview. Whitaker stole 23 years of freedom that he didn't deserve. The Wilson family lost 23 years of peace they should have had. That imbalance can never be fully corrected. Amy Wilson would have turned 35 this year. She might have become a scientist, as her childhood interests suggested. She might have had children of her own. The community still mourns not just the girl she was, but the woman she never got to become. Yet in the face of such profound loss, there remains a powerful legacy. Every cold case solved using techniques pioneered in her investigation carries Amy's influence forward. Every child who returns home safely because of improved awareness and protection measures lives a life that her story helped secure. In the quiet cemetery on the edge of town, Amy's final resting place has become a symbol of both tragedy and perseverance. Her headstone, selected by her parents, bears a simple inscription beneath her name and dates: "Truth finds a way." For the people of Shelbyville and for families of missing children everywhere, those words offer both comfort and promise, that no matter how perfect the disguise, how long the deception, or how cold the case, justice remains possible. If this story moved you or made you think differently about cold cases and community trust, please share this video with others who might appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button to support more in-depth true crime investigations like this one. Together, we can ensure that stories like Amy's are never forgotten, and that the pursuit of truth, no matter how delayed,